Ms Graham.
Thank you. Before lunch, I asked you a number of questions about media and media release.
That's correct.
And I'd like to ask you to look at another document, which I didn't put to you before lunch. It's PS 02751. You'll see, again, we'll start at the bottom, really, just it's one page. We just got to that. And you'll see that it's an email sent from Nicola Shepherd on the 3rd of May 2015 at 15:15 hours. And it's to Edinburgh Media, is that the media department? And
yes.
to yourself, Gary McEwan.
Yep.
And it says death in police custody, Kirkcaldy, and begins by talking about at around 7 a.m. this morning, Sunday the 3rd of May, police in Kirkcaldy responded to a number of calls from members of the public reporting a man brandishing a knife in the Hayfield Road area. And it goes on to detail give some brief information. Can we move down the page, please? And it says, Divisional Commander Chief Superintendent Gary McEwan said, and this is in quotation marks, "This is a tragic set of circumstances and my condolences go to the man's family. We currently have officers with them to provide information and support where appropriate. We recognise that this is an extremely difficult and distressing time for both the family and the officers involved, and I have instigated the necessary post-incident procedures. The investigation of deaths in Scotland is the responsibility of Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, who have instructed the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner to lead on this inquiry. The circumstances into the death will be fully explored and reported to the Crown Office in early course." And then you ask for information to be shared. Is that the media, the comment that you were talking about earlier before lunch?
Yes, I think so.
And then can we look at the top of that? Because I think there is a response to this media release from you, from Gary McEwan, and that's circulated to a number of areas within Police Scotland, including Nicola Shepherd and media in Edinburgh. And it says DCC, ACC. So is that Deputy Chief Constable and Assistant Chief
That's correct.
Constable? And the ACC, was that Nicholson? Or was this someone else that you were referring to?
No, if you look at it's Nicholson, just with the 2 crime OCCT, that was his title at that time.
All right, thank you. This is the proposed media release that will go to Perk and Crown for approval prior to us releasing it. Kate, I understand that's a reference to Kate, the woman who was relating to media and we've heard reference to in the gold groups. This should not, in capital letters, be released until approval and confirmation that the FLO is with next of kin. Could you confirm this is understood, Gary? Seeing that now, do you remember this email?
Yes, it's certainly me. It's come from my email, so yeah, I wrote it.
And does it make it clear that you did not want the media release to be released to the media until you can be satisfied flows were with the family?
Yeah.
And do you know what happened with this media release? Was this the one that you referred to in your inquiry statement that was later not approved by the Crown or not released by the Crown, or was it a different release?
I think that was the one that then, and rightly, and that, so 2 elements to that for me. One is at 3:15 on the 3rd, Perk are in command of that, hence why, this needs to go to Perk and by default to Crown for approval. So Perk are leading on the investigation. And secondly, I don't want this released until the flow, we have confirmation that there is flows deployed with the next of kin to enable the flows to undertake part of their role, which would have been to talk through this media release with them to ensure the family had sight of the detail before it went in a national newspaper or read out on radio or whatever.
This is a media release that would have gone out from Police Scotland if it had gone out?
Yes, if it was approved by Perk, it would have went out from Police Scotland.
It's not the same as the Dundee Courier evidence. That's not what we're talking about here.
I think it might be I don't know, but I suspect the Dundee Courier may or may not have taken elements from that release and built it into a sort of wider media, you know, for their paper the following day.
Right. All right. Thank you. Let's go back to the email that I was going to turn to, which we started. It was PS 04984, and if we could have that back on the screen. This was from a later date, 14th of May 2015, and I think we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up, if that's all right. So that if we start there, this is who the email is from. William Little. I understand some people call him Billy.
Yep.
Deputy Senior Investigator with PERC. And if we move up onto the next page. Keep going, please. So we see that this is an email from William Little, sent on the 14th of May, 7:55 in the morning, to Keith Hardy. We've heard that he was involved with MIT or MIT, and Stuart Wilson, who I think you mentioned earlier in your evidence today.
Yep.
And the subject is the family press conference. And the email reads, "Morning, Keith, Stuart. The PERC was made aware of this late yesterday afternoon. John McSporran spoke to Mr. Anwar late last night." Now, we understand, we've not heard from him yet, but we understand John McSporran is someone who's a member of staff in PERC.
Yeah, that's correct.
He spoke to Mr. Anwar late last night, and it would appear that the thrust of this conference will be to criticise the police officer's decision not to provide statements regarding their involvement. And then if we look at the press release, this is dated Wednesday the 13th of May, so the day prior to this, from Amar Anwar and Company solicitors regarding the death of Sheku Bayo in police custody, family plea for justice, press conference Thursday 14th of May. So it was a press conference scheduled for the 14th, and this was prepared
on the 13th.
and sent, discussed with Mr. McSporran of PERC. It says press conference at 10:15 Thursday 14th May with the family of Sheku Bayo in Edinburgh, followed by a private meeting with the Lord Advocate at Crown Office at 11:30. On Sunday morning, 3rd of May, Mr. Bayo, a 31-year-old father of 2 young children, died after an incident on Hayfield Road, Kirkcaldy. The cause of death is still unknown, with inquiries still being carried out by Crown pathologists and our own independent pathologists. And I think that that's correct at that time, that the final post-mortem report was pending toxicology results. It's believed that multiple officers detained Sheku Bayo, after which he lost consciousness and died. The family, who have serious concerns, will speak at the press conference along with their solicitor, Amar Anwar. Do you have any concerns about the accuracy of anything I've read so far?
No.
This will be followed by a meeting with the Lord Advocate at Crown Office. The Lord Advocate has already instructed PERC to take over the investigation into Mr. Bayo's death from Police Scotland, and we've heard that that's correct. Background notes for editors, and there's some additional information there that the Crown Office has directed PERC to carry out an independent investigation into the circumstances surrounding the death of Mr. Bayo. And it mentions the reform of services in April 2013 and PERC being established at that time and their role. Is there anything contained in there that causes you concern in terms of accuracy or the representation of what had happened?
I'm not sure that the cause of death is still the inquiry is still being carried out by Crown and own independent. I wasn't cited on that, but it doesn't cause me concern. I'm pretty sure that will be accurate.
Thank you. And if we can carry on up the page, please. So this has been sent by Billy Little to Keith and Stuart, who are involved in the investigation. And I understand that this had been given to PERC by the family's solicitor. And certainly that it would appear from that email that there's been some communication between them. And then we see that the next email in this thread is from Stuart Wilson. Do you see halfway down the page there?
Yeah.
From Stuart Wilson to Dougie Milton, who you've mentioned already today, Nicola Shepherd and yourself. And CC'd to Keith Hardy, sent at 7:59. So within a few minutes of that being received, it's been forwarded on by Stuart Wilson to you and others. And it says, you will likely already be aware, but for information. So he's very quickly passed that on to you from being received. Were you aware of this prior to the email coming in?
No.
Right. And then if we move up, we see an email from you at 88:08 on the same day. Family press conference. Lucy, is that Lucy Adamson?
Yes.
Is that the member of
director or
staff that
head
did the
of
communications
corporate comms. Yes.
document we saw earlier? Lucy, please see below. I think we need to be in a position to respond to this. I think the best avenue is most likely federation. We need to be quick with this. Will you link in with exec and feds around this? So by the time you've received this email, it's the 14th of May, which is
Yep.
the date that the press conference is scheduled. Can you tell us a little bit more about your response here? You're talking about linking it with execs and feds and things. Could you?
Yeah, of course. So the the concern for me was not what was in the press release. It was and maybe if we could go back just down a little bit, it's
Yes, let's
it's
do
the
that.
email from Perk, or the couple of sentences from Perk that raised the concern for me.
If you hold on a moment, we'll get that moved down on the screen. No, sorry. If we can go back down, I think you wanted, was
Yeah,
it to the
please,
press
yeah.
release?
That one there,
Right.
up a little bit.
Just up a little
That's
bit,
it.
please.
So
There.
You
So
know
this is the email circulating the press release from Billy Little.
yeah, and the thing that raised concerns for me, which isn't in the press release below, is that, you know, Mr McSpawn spoke to Mr Anwar late last night, and it would appear that the thrust of this conference will be to criticise police officers' decision not to provide statements regarding their involvement. So that was the concern for me, and what I felt, and if we go back to the top, was that in fairness to all of the above, the police officers in particular, and the decision or the instruction and guidance that the Federation had given, that
Perhaps if we can have on the screen your response, sorry. It's very difficult with these emails to know
I
when
know,
to
it's
stop.
always the same.
Yes.
So I just felt my initial feeling, as you'll see over that sort of 8 minutes when I took it and passed it on, was that if Mr Anwar was going to be criticising police officers and their decision to not give statements, I felt somebody should be in a position to provide an ulterior or a different perspective on whatever Mr Anwar was going to say.
And why did that cause you concern that there was going to be criticism of police officers for not giving statements?
Because, you know, I felt it was inappropriate at that time, 12 days in, for, you know, police officers that were right in the middle of this critical investigation to be criticised without having any point of rebuttal or commentary or putting forward their perspective. I felt it would have been one-dimensional.
All right. Was, in terms of your role, as you've described it to us, is it of concern if the police are criticised?
I think it's healthy to get two sides to every story. So, I mean, it's interesting for me in that the fact that it was passed on from Perk to police, that would suggest to me there was a similar nervousness around what Mr Anwar was going to say. So, yeah, so I felt the right thing to do was to move that up towards our corporate comms and to enable, you know, them to consider should they put something out media-wise or not, to explain further, perhaps, whatever Mr Anwar was going to say.
So it wasn't the press release, the terms of the press release that concerned you?
No, it was the...
It was the email
Yes.
saying there was going to be criticisms of police
course,
officers.
yeah.
And as in your role, do you feel it's part of your role, or was part of your role, to defend police officers from criticism?
I don't think it's defending them, but it's, that would be whatever Mr Anwar was going to say on that day, which is absolutely entitled to say. It's his perspective. So I felt if there was going to be criticism of police officers, then I should at least alert corporate comms and potentially the Federation to consider if they wish to provide a different perspective, or maybe agree with whatever Mr Anwar was going to say.
Are SPF, the Federation, known to agree with criticisms of police officers?
I couldn't do. I mean, the Federation are predominantly there to defend police officers, but I do know occasions where the Federation will, if they can take a different perspective. They're not going to defend the police if it's wholly inappropriate to do so.
Right. And who are corporate comms? Is that the department that Lucy Adamson was involved in?
Yes, so that's
that
her
prepared that
communication.
document we looked
Yes.
at earlier. And is part of their role to facilitate a sort of balanced reporting in the media?
Yes, I would hope so. Yeah.
And in terms of your receipt of that email from Mr. Little, were you given any additional information around the circumstances whereby he'd been given the press release?
No.
Or any information about any conversation that McSporran had with Mr. Anwar apart from what is in that email?
All I knew was what was in that email.
Did you have any concerns about sharing that information from PERC with corporate comms or the Federation?
None whatsoever. I didn't share it with Federation. I shared it with corporate comms, but I suggested that it may be worthwhile sharing with Federation.
And what did you expect corporate comms to do with that suggestion?
They would make an independent assessment, and they would take whatever they felt was in the best interests and the best decision to take. I actually don't know what they did. I don't know if you know, but I don't actually know what action they took from memory.
We've not heard yet from PERC and in relation to the press release. We'll be hopefully hearing evidence about this next year. You've said here, I think the best avenue is most likely Federation. Can you explain why you thought that was perhaps the best avenue?
So, from my perspective, bearing in mind, as I said earlier, it was because it was the Federation legal experts and or the Federation that were advising the police officers not to give statements, and Mr Anwar was going to criticise police officers for not giving statements. I felt the Federation should be in a position to give their perspective and their view on why they're instructing the officers not to do that, or advising.
Did you have any views about how likely it would be that the Police Federation would put forward a defensive position towards any criticism levelled?
I don't know. I suppose it would be dependent upon what was said at the press conference. Because there's, as I said at the beginning, there's nothing in that original email there that raises any concern for me. It's the off-table, it's the discussion between Mr Anwar and Mr McSporran that raises the concern for me.
You've mentioned that obviously Mr Bio died on the 3rd, and the police officers didn't give statements initially and didn't give them until the 4th of June, which was just over a month from the date of death. And did you feel that there was any merit in the officers being criticised for that delay in providing operational statements?
As I said this morning, they were taking the advice of a Federation legal representative. So for me, that was, legal advice is there for a reason, and they were taking that legal advice. So that was a decision, and you know, for me it was about moving on from that. If somebody independent was going to come and criticise the police officers for taking that legal advice, I felt the very least is that the public should be aware of the full circumstances rather than perhaps potentially a one-dimensional side of things.
Right. Can we look at your inquiry statement, please? And if we can look at paragraph 159. This is under reference to the same email that we've been looking at. Mr. Anwar was going to appear on the TV and criticise the police officers. It was important that somebody is in place to respond to that. The Federation is the staff association and may choose to respond. For the welfare of our police officers, somebody needs to be able to give a formal response to what Mr. Anwar was going to say. The reason I'm referencing the Federation in advance is that the Federation are the ones who are giving advice to police officers. The Federation may have gone public around that time about why the police officers were involved and were doing or not doing certain things. When you say at the end that they may have gone public, do you mean they had gone public around that time, or you thought they might in response to this press release?
No, I had no idea what the Federation would do, because I had no contact with the Federation at all. But round about that time, you know, I was conscious in the papers there was Federation commentary, but I don't know if that was before this, after this, or before and after. I was aware that there was some Federation input in the media, but I couldn't tell you exactly when.
You've talked about the monitoring of social media, which I think you said would be the media department's role.
Yeah.
Was there monitoring of the social media or the media engagement of SPF?
If there was, there'd be monitoring of any open source media that made reference to most likely anything to do with this inquiry. So if the Federation had put media messaging out, I would assume you would have to confirm with the comms that the comms would pick up on that and would capture that as well. So it wasn't just one, it was every piece of open source media that was going out in relation to this inquiry will have been getting captured by corporate comms.
Right, and that would include any SPF media engagement?
Yes.
And if there was media engagement of some description by SPF, which of itself appeared one-sided, would you have expected Police Scotland to be liaising with the family to say their solicitors might wish to give an alternative view? I
certainly would. I mean, I have previously publicly put media messaging out that contradicts or that challenges some Federation media that's been put out. It was all about staff redundancies and a remodelling exercise, a restructuring exercise that I led on, but I felt that some of the information that the Federation were putting out in the media was wholly inaccurate, so I went to the media and explained why it was.
In relation to the death of Mr. Bio, were you involved at any stage in countering any one-sided media expressed by SPF?
No. So that was not my role. I was not the media lead for this, so no.
Were you involved in any way with comms or media in relation to responding to any criticisms or comments by SPF?
No.
Were you aware of any communications with the family? Obviously you were heavily involved for a time, where they were invited to respond to perhaps criticisms or comments from SPF?
I certainly didn't do it. No, I'm not aware of that.
Thanks. From a wider perspective, in the role that you were in terms of carefully monitoring possible community tensions. Did it cause you concern that there may be different perspectives playing out in the media or in social media? The family's perspective perhaps and the SPF's perspective insofar as they may have differed. Did that cause you tension in regard to trying to take the heat out of any possible community tension?
So I was conscious of that, but I did not. There was nothing that alerted me that had led to an increase in community tension or community impact. So there was no need for me to basically go to the media or to do anything publicly, because there was no sense of community unrest as a consequence of what was getting played out in the media.
And did the media department or anyone in that department or in comms come to you and say there's situations being inflamed because of things that are appearing in the media? Could you advise us or assist in that?
And so that's the crux of it. If that had happened, then I would have made an assessment and made a decision around doing something. Who knows what that would have been, because it didn't actually happen. But if that had happened, always in the forefront of my mind was the community, was any tensions that may arise. But thankfully that didn't happen.
And when you say that didn't happen, do you mean that didn't happen? There wasn't tension between media engagement with SPF and the family, or the media department and comms didn't come to you and ask you about possible tensions arising?
Certainly, I was not aware of any heightened community tension as a consequence of, this particular press release or whatever public statements were getting made in the media from lawyers or lawyers from either side.
And I know you explain some of the background to this in your inquiry statement, but am I to understand that you were involved with the Shekobai investigation for some time after the 3rd of May? Because I think you say at one point you were supposed to be starting a new job.
Yeah, interesting. So I was meant to start my new national job on the 4th of May. So I'd actually technically finished as the commander of Fife probably on the 1st of May. If that was the Friday, was my last working day. I just happened to be working that weekend. And then, of course, when the incident kicked off on the Sunday and I met with the family on the Sunday night, I had a conversation with the chief constable and I actually asked to stay on because I felt there needed to be some continuity with the family. And I said I was happy to do that. I actually wanted to do it, and he agreed, and that's what we did.
And so despite moving to your new role, you kept an involvement in the Shekobai?
So I'd basically done both jobs. I remained the commander of Fife, worked with the family as best I could, and began my new job.
Can we look at your inquiry statement again, paragraph 165? 165. Examples in this case ties into what I stated about my initial actions. Despite PERC having oversight of the investigation, the fact they didn't have the capacity or will to speak to the family meant that the organisation who would be criticised for this would be Police Scotland, not the PERC. Was that an ongoing concern that perhaps PERC would not be the focus of criticisms, but it would in fact be a Police Scotland, even though you were no longer leading on the investigation?
Yeah, I think, and I might be doing the communities a disservice, but Police Scotland and PERC, I don't think the majority of the public would have noted a difference between the two organisations. They probably felt they were one, and by default the actions of the PERC would then, any inaction or failings of the PERC, I felt could, the public would see that as a failing of Police Scotland.
And so was this another factor in, although PERC are leading the investigation, even beyond the sort of initial days, that did you still have an interest in your role because of the potential criticism in relation to Police Scotland as an organisation? and the community tensions that could grow?
Yeah, as I said yesterday, the community tensions would or could come from the inappropriate or the service, the inadequate service that was provided to the family, and other community tensions could be raised just by actions of or inactions of PERC or any other organisation, and I was really conscious of that, and because that was at the forefront of my mind. That could be a trigger or a catalyst towards action from groups of people that I didn't want to see that could harm wider communities.
So even although long term the PERC are leading the investigation, it's not as if the police can simply back away from that and avoid any criticism. Is that fair to say? I
think it's just because PERC was not widely known. I think that was a real risk at that particular time. It may be different now, but at the time, I think the vast majority of the public will never have heard of the PERC and even understood what their role was, because they were a very new and young organisation, whereas policing had been around for hundreds of years, so it's easy to then focus on the police.
And it says the family in papers wouldn't say it was PERC who was responsible, it would be the police service. It's one of the reasons I went to see the family from a Police Scotland leadership point of view. It's also about media responses being balanced and not one-sided. Police should be balanced and informed in what they're saying publicly. And was that your view, that things that come from police service should be balanced and informed and not one-sided?
Absolutely.
And when you say police, do you mean not just police service but individual officers, or is it different?
I mean, you can't. I would hope individual officers. I mean, you can't control what every individual officer was to say. But as an organisation, if we are to maintain that public trust and confidence in police by consent, then the public need to trust and rely on us to be honest and open in our actions.
Thank you. Can we move on? I asked you earlier before lunch some questions about the statements and the notebooks, and I wanted to ask you a particular paragraph 80 in your inquiry statement. This relates specifically to use of spray and use of force forms. And I'll just explain to you we'll read out the paragraph first of all. It's not a legal requirement to complete use of force or spray forms. I don't know if it's in the guidance, but it's really seen as best practice for me. There's a few elements to it. The use of spray when the form is completed, it gives others the opportunity to scrutinise it for best practice. It's also good for the statisticians in Police Scotland to understand whether officers are using spray and why. Now, you've said there that it's not a legal requirement, but I would wonder if you could just look at something. I know you're retired. It's a memo from Police Scotland, PS 11500. And this is dated the 1st of April 2013. We've heard a number of people give evidence about this. Okay. So it's effectively the date that Police Scotland came into being. And it was a memo sent by the Assistant Chief Constable to divisional commanders and heads of department. And you'll see at the beginning of this, it says Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, operational discharge of CS incapacitance spray. From the 1st of April 2013, there is a legal requirement for the Police Service of Scotland, the SPA and the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner to ensure compliance with the provisions of the Act that's set out there. And it means that on every occasion where CS spray is discharged operationally, there is a legal requirement to record the incident and report onwards to PERC within 24 hours. Now, I just wondered if maybe on reflection, having seen that memo, you maybe want to alter that.
Yeah,
paragraph.
So it clearly is a legal requirement, yeah.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to ask you about paragraph 199, if we could go back to your inquiry statement, please. I'm asked about racially discriminatory behaviour in the police. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Yes, I've come across racially discriminatory behaviour in the police. I've chaired misconducts where a serving member of staff on Facebook put a racial image on Facebook. I'm going back maybe 5 years. Is that 5 years from the date of your statement?
Yes.
And somebody was jumping off a cliff with a parachute, and it was a black man or woman, and the police officer had said no strings attached or something. I chaired a misconduct and sacked him for that. I have been aware of this over the years. There's nothing that I've witnessed to my face, but I've been aware of through chairing misconduct hearings around ethnicity or gender or whatever. These hearings were not in the dozens. I've terminated employments based on it. And you said that you've chaired misconducts. Can you describe to us what your role was?
So you have sort of various different levels of misconduct here, or you have misconduct hearings that have different, I can't mind the phraseology now, but different, and punishment is not the right word, but different levels of, punishment, let's just call it that. So the more serious ones, which could involve the option of fining an officer or police member of staff, or dismissing them or taking annual leave off them. There are various different levels of authority there. So in the sort of latter part of my service, I was involved in chairing the more serious misconduct hearings, which had that option in them to, one of many options, but had the option to dismiss staff. So it was the more serious allegations that had been investigated in the service.
How many years did you take that role, chairing misconduct proceedings?
Probably 10, 15 years maybe.
Can you help the chair understand how often you would come across a misconduct allegation which related to racially discriminatory behaviour?
Not often. Across the whole of Scotland, again, the facts and figures would, you could get access to those facts and figures. I would be surprised if there was, 1, 2, maybe 3 misconduct hearings in a year that were focused on hate or racial discrimination. But there'll be other professional standards who will give you those facts and figures.
But in relation to those, Police Scotland would take those seriously, and people could be dismissed.
Yeah, so that was just one example where I did exactly that, yeah.
Can you remember that over those 10, 15 years, how often you were personally dealing with matters relating to racially discriminatory behaviour?
Not often. I would be predicting over the course of that 10, 15 years, maybe three or 4 times maximum.
Can you explain to us whether after a misconduct hearing, if someone was dismissed, for example, what learning opportunities were created out of that, if any?
So what would happen with a situation such as that is I would make the decision, but then the member of staff would have the right to appeal that decision, and then it would go to the Scottish Police Authority, and I would present my justification to the police authority, and then they would uphold or otherwise my decision. The Professional Standards Department then would retain my rationale, my words of conclusion, which should run to pages, to be honest with you, and then they would retain them. In relation to feedback across the organisation, I don't think that was something that we did very often, and I would suggest could be improved upon, if it's not already been improved upon.
So, from what you're aware of at the moment, I appreciate you've retired.
Yeah.
Can you help the chair understand what improvements could be made in this area?
it depends on the specific case, I suppose, you know, but for me, you know, sometimes ignorance is actually a greater, not with this one, but in general terms, ignorance is sometimes as strong an aspect of certain cases that, you know, if we could cascade the learning from that and educate the officers and police staff around why certain things were inappropriate, then that would hopefully move towards preventing further cases around that.
It wasn't done necessarily at the time, though.
I don't, not that I remember, no. I mean, this is not ignorance. This one that's on the screen, that is clear offensive racial hatred, and that's why I sacked that person. But in a general sense, the cascading of the decisions maybe could get, and maybe they are better now. I'm not really entirely sure.
We may hear more about that. Could I ask you to look at another document, please? PS 03470. And this is a letter that was sent to you. So PS 03470, and it's headed up the Fife Islamic Centre, 14th of May 2015, sent to yourself. And it relates to an incident sent from the, I think, if we go down the page, I think it says the chairman of the association. Thank you. And we go back up. Fife Islamic Centre has for many years worked closely with Fife Police to address many issues and concerns of importance to Muslim community. We acknowledge the hard work that Fife Police do. However, in this instance, we believe police did not act responsibly. This incident happened on the 3rd of May, and the people living in the house was thrown out of the house, including a 7-week-old baby and a disabled person, and into the street without any explanation. As this incident has been reported to Islamic Centres Committee, we are seeking a meeting with yourself to safeguard safety of our Muslim community as soon as possible. Thank you very much for your kind attention. We've heard evidence about this letter, that it was sent at the request of Mr. Ahmed, who is the father of Zaid Saeed.
Right.
And it was the family home that was seized on the 3rd of May by officers. And they were asked to leave the house. Excuse me. And there were considerable concerns by members of the family about the way they were treated on that day. Now, when you received this letter, what did you do with it?
I genuinely, I can't remember. I actually can't remember seeing that letter, but I'm not saying I didn't, but I just genuinely can't remember.
If we look at PS 03477, so this is a response from Sir Stephen House, the Chief Constable, to Mr. Ahmed. And it says, Dear Mr. Ahmed, so this is a response, complaint about the police. Thank you for attending Leavenmouth Police Station on Tuesday the 26th of May in order to discuss issues which occurred on the 3rd of May. Officers from P Division attended in connection with an incident which had occurred earlier at Kirkcaldy. They were instructed to secure the premises as there was potential forensic evidence within which required to be secured. On arrival, the premises were occupied by your wife, son and daughter. The police subsequently secured the premises and requested that the occupants found alternative accommodation until the forensic examination was complete. You've raised concerns that the police officers failed to communicate the purpose of their attendance fully to you, which resulted in confusion. Having discussed the matters with you in detail, it's clear there have been shortcomings with regard to the standard of communication between the police and members of your family. And then it goes on to comment about potential forensic evidence and a balance to be struck. So it appears this letter was a response to the complaint that was made, and that there'd been a meeting. We saw that reference in the first paragraph. And this is a response from the Chief Constable himself, Were you involved in any of this at all?
I genuinely don't remember. I would expect that the local area chief inspector, so, you know, hence one of the reasons that I asked Nicola Shepherd to come out for the incident that happened in Kirkcaldy, because she had the local knowledge. The local chief inspector for Leavenmouth, whose name escapes, it might be in the bottom of the letter.
Let's go to the bottom of the letter.
I don't know who signed the letter. Yeah, so Tom Brown. So, yeah, that does not. That's the right person. He is the chief inspector currently, I think, in Fife somewhere. Him or the chief inspector are the right people to deal with that, in my view, because they know the local community, they have the relationships, the contacts, the trust. So I'm pleased to see that Tom did meet with that individual.
So although the original letter was addressed directly to you, you were named, is it possible for that simply to be rerouted to Tom Brown, the inspector at Leavenmouth, without you having become involved at all?
I think most likely I would have been given sight of it, I just can't remember it, but Tom Brown is the right person to deal with that. I mean, it's like, you know, in any organisation, a lot of members of the public write to the head of the organisation, but the head of any organisation doesn't then write a letter of response or meet with every complainant or interested party. It's about the local contact, the local relationships, and the local inspector is the appropriate level for that.
So can we look at the date? I'm not sure if I read out a date actually. This letter talks about a meeting on the 26th of May. By that stage, there'd been a meeting, in the first paragraph. It mentions a meeting at Leavenmouth Police Station, and this letter was after that meeting.
Yeah.
Given your role and your involvement in the incident, does it cause you, or did it cause you any concern to know that complaints or a complaint had been received about the securing of these premises?
I mean, complaints are received a large number of times. It's more about if the complaints are properly investigated and if the matter is resolved to a satisfactory conclusion is the bit that interests me. And you know, you'd have to ask Tom Brown or Mr. Ahmed to come in. The sense I'm getting is that has been a positive and constructive meeting, but clearly I wasn't there.
All right, thank you. Are there records kept by Police Scotland of complaints of racist behaviour?
There should be. Yeah.
Is there anyone, you've talked to us earlier about Gillian Bolton.
Yeah.
Is there anyone in police service whose task is to identify racist attitudes amongst officers or staff in Police Scotland?
You'd be better to ask a current serving officer about that. I'm too long out the service to probably add value to that.
In your experience dealing with misconduct proceedings, 10, 15 years you said, and from your own experience of being in the police service, do you have any views on whether there's under-reporting of racist attitudes or racist behaviour?
I don't have any evidence of it. I suspect there will be, because what my experience has told me, not in the police, I'm talking about across society, is that there is under-reporting of hate-related incidents and or crime. So why would that not manifest itself in a huge organisation like Police Scotland? So, and
knowing what you knew at the end of your career, the 10, 15 years where you were dealing with misconduct, is there anything looking back at that now that where you think reporting mechanisms within the police may have hampered reporting of racially discriminatory behaviour?
Not hampered. No, I can't think of any technological or cultural issues that would hamper the reporting. But again, I'm not the best person to ask. If the best person or the best people to ask would be those that are underrepresented in the organisation, to see if they felt that there were any barriers or inhibitors towards them reporting racial discrimination or whatever it is we're focused on here.
Thank you. When you went to visit the family on the 3rd of May, did they raise issues with you at that meeting about whether possible racism or racially discriminatory behaviour had been a contributor to Mr. Byles' death?
No, the meeting was too frantic at that point. That was not a sort of point of conversation. No.
Can I ask you to look at paragraph 37 of your inquiry statement, please? This is at an early stage in your inquiry statement when you've been asked about the critical incident being declared. You said, I took learning from other events across the country in which policing had been criticised for the response. One example which I was aware of was the tragic death of a Vietnamese delivery driver in Edinburgh. It was in 2009 or thereabouts. One of the learnings of that incident was it was never declared a critical incident by the police. That failure to declare a critical incident meant the police were unable to step up the response and to give it the priority it perhaps deserved. I didn't want to make that mistake. I'm interested in your reference to this death in 2009. Was that something that had learning been cascaded by the police at that time?
Yes, we were individual police forces at that time, so it wasn't a single police service in 2009. But the tragic death of Simon Sang and the subsequent inquiry into it certainly made it clear, and the learning that I took from reading the various publications was that the police could have identified this as a sort of racially motivated crime and acted differently. I mean, the outcomes and the findings are for all to see, but that was certainly part of the learning that I took personally from it. And
did this actually relate to its public knowledge? It was a Simon Sang?
Yeah, delivery driver, yeah.
Mm-hmm. At Loch End in Edinburgh.
That's right.
Your recollection, interestingly, is that he was Vietnamese. And as I understand the situation, he'd been wrongly described as Vietnamese at the time, and when in fact he was Chinese. And I think that was something that the police reflected on as a part of the review. Is that an interesting example how misinformation at an early stage can still linger in the mind and be remembered? You know, this happened in 2009. Here we are in 2023, and we see in your statement that he's a Vietnamese delivery driver.
Yeah, it could be.
So does this reflect, in a way, the significance of misinformation being shared at an early stage and the impact it can have long term?
Perhaps, yeah.
I've a few more questions,
No, that's fine.
if I may. The CCTV cameras in the police office at Kirkcaldy and in the van, the first van to arrive at Avon Road, were out of order and had been for some time. Can you help us understand whose responsibility would that have been to ensure maintenance of CCTV, either fixed CCTV in an office or a police office or in a van?
So in 2015, that would be the responsibility of the Estates Department, which would be located centrally. I couldn't tell you exactly where. Yep.
Was it their responsibility to monitor CCTV and check that it was working, or was that not part of
No,
it?
that would be done locally, but the reality was, I don't know if it still is, but the reality was is that there was more the estate of certain areas of Police Scotland, including CCTV, some were in more dire need of improvement and repair and upgrade than others. So what the Estates Department, or part of their responsibility, would be to prioritise. There is no sort of bottomless pit of money, so it would be about trying to prioritise the areas of highest risk for upgrade or repair. So was that the backyard, did you say?
Yes, in Kirkcaldy Police Office, it was at the back.
Yeah, so I mean that is a pretty low risk CCTV. There are other far more important areas such as custody cells, custody booking in areas that would, if we're going to invest, or if policing are going to invest their limited pot of money to upgrade, it would be those areas, and it would just be a prioritisation exercise.
Thank you. Yesterday you mentioned the Police Commanders Forum.
Yes.
At an early stage yesterday morning. And I think from recollection, you said that they met every 4 weeks or every month or
Yeah, I
something
think so,
along
yeah.
those lines. And you talked about them discussing best practice and sharing ideas. Thinking of that in 2015, were after the events involving the death of Mr. Bio, at the subsequent Police Commanders Forum, was there discussion about what had happened, lessons that could be learned, improvements that could be made, that type of thing?
Yes, I mean, I would have given a briefing to the commanders around, the circumstances, the transfer of command, and just a briefing as from a policing commander's perspective, and any emerging lessons or initial lessons learned or whatever I likely would have had communicated them, because the important part of that for me is that this could happen anywhere in the country. It just so happened, sadly, that it happened in Hayfield Road in Kirkcaldy, but it could have happened in Glasgow or Aberdeen or one of the islands. So it's important that we as an organisation learn from these and try and, if it happens again tomorrow, which it could, different ethnicity, different location, but something not dissimilar could happen again, and we need to be in a position to try and perform better than we did on this occasion and continually improve.
And would that be a standing item on the agenda going forward, to think about lessons learned and improvements that could be made, or would it have been discussed at the first forum meeting after Mr. Bio's death?
I couldn't tell you. It depends. I don't know when the next commanders meeting was after the 3rd of May, but I would imagine the chair would have asked me, because that was what we did, would have asked me to give a initial insight to my colleagues around the case that we're here for today.
And who would have identified those lessons learned? Would it be you in your role as commander?
It would have been, it's actually less a formal lessons learned to more my experience. So it was the commander's experience of it, so other commanders that were around the table could gain an insight. So if he or she was in a similar situation at some point in the future, then they could reflect back on some of the experiences that I had and maybe do things differently, or follow good practice, or whatever that may be.
Apart from the Police Commanders Forum, was there a formal lessons learned process that Police Scotland engaged in after Mr. Bio's death?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you, but because I moved, as I said, I then moved to a national job, probably at least 6 weeks after that. So the commander that came in after me would have been responsible for whatever role they played. So I don't know, to be honest.
Do you remember who that was?
There was two that came in very quick succession. Andy Edmonston or Angela McLaren. One is retired and Angela works down in London now.
Thank you very much. Finally, can I ask you to look at SBPI 00270? This is another statement which I didn't have in your folder yesterday, and I would just like to refer you to it today just to complete the bundle that you've looked at. This again is a response to a Rule 8 request from the inquiry, and it's from you, and I think on the final page we see it was signed by you. All pages were signed on the 24th of February this year. Now this relates to training and the extent to which you were engaged as a strategic firearms commander. And I think you explained yesterday that you were not, it wasn't declared a firearms incident, and you were not acting in your role as a strategic firearms commander.
That's correct.
But this really is your response to that. And sorry, we just had the last paragraph there. It said, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. And you've signed every page. Can I ask you one thing? It relates to paragraph 3 or answer 3, and it's on the following page. So if we go up to 3, you were asked, when you were first informed of the circumstances of the incident, did you consider that it could or should have been declared a firearms incident? Please explain in as much detail as possible. And then I think your response is, at the time I was first made aware of the incident, Shekubayo had already been restrained by officers. The matter was already under control. The declaration of a firearms incident certainly could have been made at an early stage by officers engaged earlier, but that would be based on their assessment of the information available at that time. As set out in the Armed Policing SOP at paragraph 8.4.1, an incident can still be treated as a firearms incident even if it's not involving a firearm. We've heard other evidence from people that it could actually be a bladed instrument.
Yep.
Where it is otherwise so dangerous that the deployment of police firearms resources may be required to safely control the situation. So it doesn't have to be a gun, effectively. It could be something else if it's a dangerous situation.
That's correct.
And the question of whether that should have happened is really one for the officers who were on the scene. Personally, had it been my decision, then I might well have declared it a firearms incident, depending on the information that was available at that time. But these are immediate operational decisions taken in a fluid operational setting, and the officers on duty were entitled to take their own decisions based on what they knew. You've said there that you might well have declared a firearm incident depending on the information available at the time. What sort of information would you have required if you had been going to declare a firearms incident?
Each scenario can be different, but if you look at the scenario in its basic sense, where you had multiple calls of an individual in possession of a knife at 7 o'clock, give or take, in the morning, and I think I mentioned before, that to me, it strikes me as being accurate, as being real, whereas you sometimes do get the odd call at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's probably unlikely to be true. But for me, this, there is no doubt in my mind, with the independence of the calls, that it's likely to be true in the time of morning. So on that basis alone, I may, if I had been the inspector in Bilston, I may have considered it appropriate to declare this a firearms incident and may have deployed firearms towards the scene.
Thank you. Could you give me a moment, please? Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
I'll come to Mr Hamilton in a moment, but are there any other Rule 9 applications? Ms Mitchell and Mr Scullion. Now, Mr McEwan, would you mind withdrawing to the witness room, please? Ms Mitchell?
I've headed them under topics, the first one being race. A question that I would like to ask this witness arising from his evidence was that he gave evidence yesterday that an important factor in the matter having been called a critical incident was, amongst other things, the ethnicity of Mr Bio. He immediately realised that, as he said, that might cause concern. And so what we've heard from this officer is that he immediately thinks that's important, yet nowhere in any of his statements does he mention race in particular. Does he say this is a particular issue? And the inquiry has also heard evidence from all the police officers who almost everyone came in and said they simply hadn't thought of the issue of race, that all the time they were there waiting, that hadn't crossed their mind. So what I would like to ask this witness was, firstly, does he think that there is a problem within the police force of people being scared to mention race? Is there some reason why that is not being mentioned? Further, to ask him whether or not, had a white man died in custody, would he have been concerned also, as he describes it, about looting, widespread disorder and criminality, or was his race a factor in that? And I would also like to ask this witness, was he trained in unconscious bias? And was, while the period of time he was working in the police service, a colour-blind approach used in relation to the police? Moving on, Leslie Bowles, who will come to hear evidence of, gave her statement asking on race, and a statement was put by my learned friend to Leslie Bowles, which was taken, and Leslie Bowles said, Chief Super McEwan and I didn't discuss the nature of the investigation. Race as a possibility was not discussed with Chief Super McEwan. However, it is in the back of your mind when you're thinking about all the possibilities. In terms of hypotheses, one would have been that the male had been treated differently because he was a black male. I can't remember having a conversation with anyone else about it, but the feeling I got was that everybody was thinking along the same lines as me, that there was a possibility that the actions of the police officers or a police officer was because Mr Bio was black. And I would like to ask him, is that something that he was thinking? Was that a hypothesis that he had? And I should remind the inquiry that this comes within a context where this witness has given evidence that he has considered various hypotheses, because in relation to giving out the post-mortem reports, he has given evidence that he'd considered there was no question of criminality arising with the police. I would also like to ask him about a further hypothesis. The officer describes the match-fit investigators that were all involved, Pat Campbell, Colin Robson, Graham Dursley, and said that from the outset, for example, counter-terrorism was considered and it was ruled out. What I would like to ask this witness was, do you think any part of those discussions should have considered the issue of positional asphyxia, and whether or not, if he did that, he mentioned it to anyone at that meeting or subsequent meetings? Moving on to a different topic, attending at the family home. Excuse me, Lord. Pat Campbell on day 49 gave evidence in relation to the attendance of the witness McEwan at the family home, and that's from line 55 onwards. And what he indicated was that DCI Chief Superintendent McEwan had indicated he was aware of the brother-in-law of the deceased, and that he'd also come back from, and that also came back from the two officers who had delivered the second death message, that a family
Can you
member.
slow down a little
Oh,
bit,
sorry.
Miss Mitchell? I think the stenographer is struggling. a bit.
Sorry. I'll cut it short to say that it was made clear that the family had asked for Mr McEwan to make contact with the family or provide them with some further information. So it's just to get his reflection on that, because his evidence yesterday was that he had decided to go and that he didn't remember at that particular time that he knew the family members, but it appears there's contradictory evidence suggesting it was the Bio family that requested a senior officer to come to the house and explain to them what was happening. And with respect, I think that's important when it comes to the issue of post-incident management, as to whether or not it was the family who had to ask for someone to attend. Further, resistance from family. Pat Campbell gave evidence on D49 at line 80 and following that there was still resistance from the family about attending to identify Mr Bio prior to the post-mortem actually taking place the following day. And when he was asked about that level of resistance, he said, it really came from Garry McEwan, to be honest with you. And it was really about the fact that they had made it clear that they would not attend for the post-mortem examination for the identification aspect. And then it was put to this witness, we've heard evidence that they wish to give time for the deceased mother to arrive from London before they would formally identify Mr Bio prior to the post-mortem. And he's asked about his recollection of that. And I would like to put to this witness what his recollection of that matter was as well. In particular, whether or not he recalled that the family, rather than simply not cooperating, wished to wait until Mrs Bio came up the next day. The next issue that I would like to raise with this witness is treating officers differently from the friends and family of Sheikh Bio. This officer has explained the balance between investigation and ensuring the welfare of officers. What I would like to set out for him is the various ways in which the friends and family of Mr Bio were treated, including Zahid Said, his family, the home of Martin Dick and Kirsty MacLeod, them being interviewed, Colette Bell being interviewed 12 minutes at maximum after not she'd been told that her partner may be dead, because the rationale for that was it was important for the police to get as much information as soon as possible. And there are various other examples of that it might, not to tell Colette Bell that it was after contact with the police that her partner may have died, as it might have compromised the investigation. Yet, when this officer comes to the issue of how to treat the police officers, he explains that it's about the best evidence and not the quickest evidence, and went on to explain that in some detail. We have the position in contrast with the police. They were put into a room together. It appears there were clearly discussions about whether or not to give statements and what circumstances that would happen. And it took no less than 32 days, over a month, before Police Scotland got statements from professional witnesses who were present and who were active in his restraint. And what I want to ask against that background is, does he see why there might be a public perception that the police officers who were not providing statements were being treated in a way that above all took consideration of their well-being, and that the investigation was being carried out with considerably less consideration to the well-being of the friends and family of Sheikh Bio? In relation, moving on in relation to the outcome of the post-mortem, the evidence of Pat Campbell at D49 was at page 90, line 24. I think it was Garry McEwan that had raised the matter around it, and he raised it to the chair, around about the disclosure of post-mortem results to the officers involved in the restraint. So there's quite a detailed discussion around that. and PERC were involved in it to an extent, but again, the main representative from PERC was Billy Little. And then it goes on. What he also says was that it was put to him, we may have heard the suggestion that without information about the cause of death from the post-mortem, officers would be unwilling to give any sort of statement. Was that part of the discussion that you either had at the Gold Group meetings or the meeting with PERC at 7:30 in the evening? And Pat Campbell says, there was some reference to it. I think it came from Chief Inspector Shepherd or potentially Garry McEwan. I'm not sure that there was information about the fact that officers were not going to provide a statement until the results of the post-mortem examination, so that there was information there. It hadn't come directly to me, but it was discussed at the Gold Group, and I knew it was perhaps an extension of what I already knew, that they weren't willing to provide statements. So what I would like to ask in relation to that is obviously whether or not that jogs his memory, that it was him that may have brought it up, and that there was some kind of discussion with regards to what might be looked at as a trade of information for information. Moving on to the issue of tensions growing. We heard evidence from one of Mr McEwan's colleagues, Detective Superintendent Nicola Shepherd, on day 52. And that was the 17th March 2023. She says at page 10, there was a question around the issue of counter-terrorism or whether or not this had been a terror-related incident. And she said yes. And the question is put to her, put short, your evidence was, I wasn't able to help them, and this is lay people and the public, I wasn't able to help them because I wasn't able either confirm or deny whether this was a terrorist-related incident, because the time I was dealing with it, the PERC had control of the investigation. We know that from an early point in time, the issue of terrorism had been ruled out in this case. We know that Garry McEwan was intent on trying to avoid public unrest. And the question I would like to put to him was, does he recall whether or not he spoke about the issue of terrorism that might put people's minds at rest, as was being flagged up by Detective Superintendent Nicola Shepherd? Further, given the evidence that he has already given, does he consider that Nicola Shepherd's explanation for that ties in well with his role of continuing to deal with comms, even though PERC was involved? Coming to the end, in relation to media, there was a document which I think my learned friend indicated that she would cover these issues, but perhaps not this particular. She didn't say anything about the document, she said the issues would be explored. And that was a document where the comms department had set out a summary of media coverage and had identified the media coverage in certain ways, for example, if it was favourable or not favourable to the police. That was sent on to Garry McEwan, who replied to the media summary that it had been first class. And I just want to ask him about the contents of what was contained there, including phrases where they appear to be balancing whether or not these reports reflected a benefit to the family or to the police. And as part of that question, and asking those questions, I want to know what part of the post-incident management procedure was looking at the press and managing the press response to matters.
What was that document you're talking about?
That document is PS 02581. Finally, in a matter arising from the questions by my learned friend in relation to the email of 14th May about the family press conference, I would like to ask in particular questions about the use of the corporate we, as he described it, was a collective. He has set out why he thinks that it would be a good idea, or why he thinks it's a good idea to have balance in the reporting. And he set out what his view is. And my question is, if that was the position, why didn't Police Scotland put out the media report? Why was it better to send it and to be sent from Park? And also, what does he mean by we in that context? Because it is clear that the we seems to reflect the police as a whole and not differentiate Police Scotland from the Federation. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Scullion, would you go, please?
Sorry to interrupt proceedings. I understand that the stenographer is in need of a break
Yes, well,
at
in
the
that
moment.
case, we'll take a break, 15-minute break. Right, I'm going to hear Mr. Scullion's application and then adjourn for the night in order to consider the applications. Mr. Scullion.
So there is a written Rule 9 application, and it relates to issue 2 in that application, but I would seek to ask the witness questions about his evidence regarding the delay and ultimate failure to deploy PIRC family liaison officers during 3rd May 2015. The witness was highly critical of PIRC in relation to this issue, and I would seek to explore the factual basis upon which the criticism was made. In particular, I would like to ask him about his knowledge of an instruction given by Deputy Senior Investigating Officer Keith Harrower on the morning of 3rd May 2015 that the family liaison officers were initially to be deployed by Police Scotland, which would then transfer later to PIRC. I would like to ask him about his knowledge on the morning of 3rd May 2015 of an agreement by Police Scotland that they would be deploying family liaison officers. I would like to explore with him his knowledge of difficulties which arose internally for Police Scotland in relation to the deployment of family liaison officers on 3rd May 2015. I would like to ask him if he was aware that the family liaison officers initially identified by Police Scotland turned out not to be on duty. And by reference to the Gold Group meeting minutes, the Gold Group at 14:30 hours, which he attended, I would like to ask him to comment on the entry in those minutes which would appear to confirm that family liaison officers from Police Scotland had in fact been identified. And I would like to invite him to comment on the proposition that by 2:30 in the afternoon, arrangements were in place for Police Scotland family liaisons to be briefed, including a briefing in relation to equality and diversity. Yesterday and again today, the witness gave evidence regarding his visit to the family home of Ch Supt. He said he visited the family because of PIRC's failure to deploy their family liaison officers. I would like to ask him to comment on whether in fact he visited the family because he was told that the family had demanded to see him. Yesterday, the witness gave evidence about the detail of that meeting, and in the course of his evidence, Senior Counsel put to the witness evidence which was obtained from the family in relation to information said to have come from him at the meeting. The information would appear to be very similar to that noted in the manuscript version of the document produced at the first Gold Group meeting. And I would like to ask the witness whether the family's upset and feelings of hostility towards Police Scotland seemed to be exacerbated as a result of his meeting, and whether he felt his meeting added to their concern that they had been given changing and contradictory information by Police Scotland. And I would want to ask him if it was following his visit to the family and because of the family's reaction during his visit that a decision was taken that it was no longer possible to deploy Police Scotland family liaison officers to the family, and if that is in fact the reason why the family were not visited on 3rd May 2015 by trained family liaison officers. And finally, if in fact that is why Deputy Senior Investigator Harrower had to go and see the family late on the evening of 3rd May before deploying PIRC family liaison officers on 4th May. Those are the questions that I would wish to raise.
Thank you. Is there a matter?
I understand that there's a technical issue with the YouTube channel, which is streaming proceedings, and as a result, we're no longer at this moment streaming the hearing.
Yes, well, we're about to adjourn in any event, but no doubt if it's been recorded, it can be put on the website and people can catch up. Well, I'll adjourn until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.